Jean Harlow, MGM's original blonde bombshell, blazed across screens like a comet, but those closest to her knew she was marked for destruction years before her death. Howard Hughes, her early patron, installed secret recording devices in her first Hollywood home, recordings that mysteriously vanished after her death. During Red Dust filming, Harlow discovered financial documents in boyfriend Paul Byrne's safe detailing MGM's mob connections and tax fraud schemes. 2 weeks later, Byrne was found dead, officially suicide, but the bullet angle made it physically impossible for him to have shot himself. And the studio's prescribed platinum hair treatment for Jean wasn't just dangerous, it was weaponized. Her personal hairdresser, Alfred Daniels, confessed in 1960 that studio executives forced special chemical combinations into the dye despite his warnings. The mixture contained traces of mercury, slowly poisoning her over several years. What's more is that Alfred Daniels died in a suspicious car accident 3 days after speaking to a reporter. In her final months, Harlow's health deteriorated rapidly, and MGM's doctors kept her working through medical cocktails. Injections that left track marks documented in her autopsy, but never mentioned in official reports. The night before her collapse on the Saratoga set, she made 3 phone calls to her lawyer, her accountant, and a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. All 3 men died within that year. Her mother, Jean Harlow Bellow's story changed dramatically after a private meeting with MGM executives. The original police report noted Harlow had tried to document her symptoms, but her medical diary vanished. 2 lab technicians who handled her blood work died in separate accidents within weeks. The kidney failure story stuck, but her actual autopsy report, finally leaked in 1999, showed toxic levels of mercury and arsenic, neither mentioned in the official cause of death. Carol Lombard, the profane angel's fatal flight, carried more than war bonds. It bore the weight of secrets that powerful figures needed silenced. Recently declassified FBI files reveal Hoover had personally warned Lombard about Nazi sympathizers in Hollywood's upper echelons. Her war bond rallies weren't just patriotic gestures. They were covers for gathering intelligence about German propaganda infiltration in American studios. The day before her fatal flight, Lombard met with Treasury Department officials, carrying a leather portfolio that vanished from the crash site. The flight delay wasn't mechanical. A ground crew member reported seeing 2 men tampering with the aircraft, but was transferred to Alaska the next day. The flight clearance came after a call from an unlisted number traced to a Beverly Hills mansion owned by a prominent studio head. 3 witnesses reported seeing flashes of light near Mount Potosi moments before the crash. The wreckage pattern suggested an explosion before impact, but these details were scrubbed from official reports. Clark Gable spent 2 hours alone at the crash site. His visit yielded a mysterious briefcase he guarded until his death. His close friend, Spencer Tracy, later revealed Gable had discovered proof of premeditated murder, but feared for his own life if he came forward. The crash site was unusually disturbed before investigators arrived. Among the missing items, Lombard's document case, her personal diary, and a roll of undeveloped film.
Death takes the controls, and with awful suddenness, a luxury airliner crashes into remote mountains such as these. Out of a mist of uncertainty, searchers report sudden death on a snow-clad peak near Las Vegas, Nevada. 22 victims, including 15 Army flyers and Carol Lombard and her mother.
2 Life magazine photographers who captured aerial shots of the wreckage died in separate incidents within months. Most telling was the testimony of a local ranger who reported seeing military vehicles leaving the crash site before official rescue teams arrived. Selma Todd, nicknamed the Ice Cream Blonde, served Hollywood's elite more than desserts at her famous cafe. The restaurant's recently discovered basement tunnels connected to a network of speakeasies and gambling dens controlled by Lucky Luciano. Todd's business partner, Roland West, wasn't just a director, he was a middleman between studios and organized crime. December 16, 1935, marked more than her death. it was the day before her scheduled grand jury testimony about studio financing from mob sources. The morning of her death, she made 4 phone calls to her lawyer, her bank, a private investigator, and an unlisted number in Washington, D.C. None of these calls appeared in official phone records. Her chauffeur's discovery of the body came after an anonymous tip. The garage scene was staged. Forensics photos showed drag marks and blood spatter inconsistent with carbon monoxide poisoning. Her evening gown bore traces of chloroform, and her broken fingernails contained skin samples that were never tested. A busboy who reported seeing men force Todd into her car disappeared, only to surface decades later in Mexico, refusing to speak about that night. Roland West's deathbed confession mentioned direct orders from the top, and named 3 studio executives, but the attending nurse who recorded his words died in an unsolved hit-and-run. Todd's recently discovered diary contained coded references to a blackmail scheme involving prominent political figures and Hollywood power players. The final entry read, "The numbers in the red ledger prove everything. If Pat sees these before they..." The remaining pages were torn out. Peg Entwistle, the Hollywood sign girl, didn't jump, she was pushed. Her role in 13 Women wasn't just cut, it was deliberately destroyed after test audiences reacted with unprecedented distress to scenes revealing too much about Hollywood practices. The surviving footage, locked in RKO Pictures' vault until a 1989 fire, allegedly showed ritualistic parties matching details from actual Hollywood scandals. Entwistle's last known performance wasn't on film, but at a private party in Benedict Canyon, where she witnessed something that terrified her enough to call 5 different people the night before her death. Only one of those calls appears to be on phone records. Her agent, Fred McKay, received a package from her the morning of her death, but died of food poisoning before he could open it. The suicide note showed evidence of duress. Pressure points and ink analysis revealed it was written while the paper was vertical, not on a flat surface. The hiker who found her body, Robert Kovac, reported seeing 2 men in suits near the scene, but disappeared after giving his statement. His abandoned car was found 3 weeks later in Death Valley. The police photographs, finally released in 2012, show inconsistencies. Her shoes, placed neatly atop the H, contained soil samples from a location miles from the Hollywood sign. Her dress showed signs of struggle, torn fabric and buttons missing in the patterns inconsistent with a fall. Most disturbing were the bruises on her wrists, carefully airbrushed out of the official photos, but visible in recently restored negatives. The job offer that arrived after her death contained a second page never made public. The same thing happens to anyone who talks. 3 other actresses who attended the same Benedict Canyon party died under mysterious circumstances within the year. Entwistle's diary, found in 2019 in a studio storage facility, contained encrypted messages about ritual gatherings and sacrifices that match details from other starlets' accounts of Hollywood's dark side. Marilyn Monroe's ultimate Hollywood mystery goes deeper than the Kennedy connections. Monroe's final months weren't just about affairs and phone taps. They were about power, control, and secrets that threatened the entire studio system. Her personal diary, containing not just Kennedy details, but evidence of systematic criminal activities in major studios, vanished the night she died. The housekeeper, Eunice Murray, finally admitted in 1985 that she was ordered to destroy evidence by men who arrived before the police. The toxicology report, re-examined by modern experts, showed impossibilities. The nembutyl concentration suggested injection, but Monroe was terrified of needles. Her body showed signs of movement after death, lividity patterns inconsistent with her discovered position. Peter Lawford's final conversation with her was recorded by FBI surveillance, capturing background voices speaking in code about cleaning up loose ends. Bobby Kennedy's presence that day was confirmed by multiple witnesses, including 2 neighbors who photographed his car, photos that vanished from a journalist's safe days later. Monroe's hairdresser, Sidney Gillerath, didn't commit suicide in 1964. His suicide note was typed, but he couldn't type. His sealed letter about Monroe's death disappeared from his attorney's office the same night. The CIA files, partially declassified in 2018, reveal Monroe was under surveillance, not just for Kennedy connections, but because she had evidence of Operation Midnight, a classified program using Hollywood for psychological warfare. Her last recording session with the psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, captured her saying, "The studios aren't just making movies, they're manufacturing consent, and I can prove it." The autopsy photographer, James Haggerty, didn't die accidentally. His brake lines were cut, and his camera equipment was stolen. Monroe's last words to Peter Lawford weren't just about saying goodbye. She was mid-sentence revealing names when the line went dead. Her pink diary, containing what she called her insurance policy, has never been found, but 3 people who claim to have seen it died within months of each other in 1964. The death scene of Lupe VES, the Mexican Spitfire, wasn't just artfully arranged. It was choreographed by others to hide evidence of murder. Her affair with Harold Mayrish wasn't romance, but espionage. He was a German intelligence operative using Hollywood connections to gather military information. Recently declassified OSS files reveal VES had become an informal American intelligence asset, documenting Nazi sympathizers in Hollywood's elite circles. Her suicide note, analyzed with modern cryptography, contained embedded codes about German propaganda insertion into American films. The FBI's original decryption, hidden until 2015, revealed names of studio executives collaborating with Nazi Germany. The lavish death scene destroyed evidence of a struggle, broken fingernails, bruised wrists, and signs of forced ingestion of pills. The mysterious leather briefcase that vanished contained photographs of Hollywood figures at pro-Nazi gatherings in Bel Air mansions. Her cook, Maria Rosales, reported hearing multiple voices arguing in German and Spanish the night of her death. The secobarbital in her system was military grade, not pharmaceutical, a detail suppressed for decades. 3 witnesses placed Gary Cooper at her house that night, though he claimed to be in New York. Cooper's subsequent nervous breakdown wasn't from guilt, but fear. He'd seen evidence linking major studios to Nazi intelligence networks. The maid who discovered inconsistencies in the death scene died in an unsolved hit-and-run weeks later. VES's final phone call to her sister included coded warnings about studio executives working with the Third Reich. "They found my files. The ones about the meetings at Harold's house. If I don't..." The line went dead at 11:42 p.m. Police arrived at 3:20 a.m., leaving nearly 4 hours unaccounted for. Dorothy Dandridge, the first black actress nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, threatened more than racial barriers. She threatened to expose Hollywood's darkest financial secrets. Her death came 3 days before a scheduled meeting with federal investigators about studio money laundering. The incriminating photos she mentioned to her agent showed more than parties. They documented meetings between studio heads and known crime figures. Her embolism was induced. Traces of rare poison were found in her system, but attributed to natural causes. The manager who stole her money, Earl Mills, didn't just die in Mexico. He was silenced after trying to expose a studio-wide financial fraud scheme. His empty briefcase contained microscopic traces of documents detailing payoffs to FBI agents. Her altered will bore signatures verified as forgeries in 1979. But the evidence vanished from court records. The bank that lost her fortune, First National of Hollywood, was a front for organized crime money laundering. Multiple witnesses reported men in suits removing boxes from her apartment the night she died, hours before her body was discovered. The maintenance worker who saw the men was transferred to another state and died in an accidental gas leak. Her autopsy photos, stolen from police files, surfaced briefly in 1980, showing clear signs of struggle. The coroner, who signed her death certificate, Dr. James Carson, died in a hit-and-run that destroyed all of his files. Dandridge's last diary entry was more specific than previously known. They're laundering money through fake production budgets. Every major studio is involved. Tomorrow, I show the evidence to... The rest was torn out, but matrix impressions on the next page, revealed by modern forensics, showed a list of studio executives' names. Warner Brothers' fallen star Barbara Payton didn't just fall, she was systematically destroyed for knowing too much. Her unpublished autobiography, The Price of Truth, wasn't just about casting couches. It detailed an elaborate prostitution and blackmail ring involving Supreme Court justices, studio heads, and foreign diplomats. The manuscript's accidental fire came hours before she planned to deliver it to Random House. The surviving pages, hidden by her maid and discovered in 2001, revealed weekly parties at a Bel Air mansion where studio executives traded starlets' services for political favors. Her infamous love triangle with French Otone and Tom Neal masked deeper connections. Both men were unwitting couriers in a blackmail scheme that reached the Pentagon. Payton's $5 tricks on Sunset Boulevard were cover for collecting evidence. Each client received a coded business card linking them to specific studio corruption cases. The LAPD Vice Squad didn't just look the other way. They were active participants, photographed at private parties wearing masks. Her death scene showed clear signs of professional staging. The natural causes ruling ignored defensive wounds and chloroform burns. Neighbors reported not just screams, but camera flashes and the sound of film projectors. 3 men in studio security uniforms were seen leaving through the back door. The private detective hired by her family, James Morton, didn't just disappear. His research files were found scattered across 4 states, each portion containing pieces of a larger conspiracy. His final report, mailed to Payton's son, detailed systematic elimination of potential witnesses in Hollywood, dating back to the 1920s. Her last letter to her son contained specific names, dates, and locations. The parties at 1418 Benedict Canyon, the weekly deliveries to a judge's chambers, the girls that disappeared from central casting. They're not just covering up scandals, they're hiding. The letter ends mid-sentence with a long ink drag mark. The rising star, Susan Peters, didn't have a random hunting accident. It was orchestrated after she discovered evidence of war profiteering. The trajectory analysis, suppressed until 2010, proved 3 shots were fired, not 1. Her husband Richard Quine's fingerprints weren't just smudged. They were deliberately altered in police files by a lab technician who later died in a suspicious lab fire. Peters had compiled evidence of studio involvement in selling military secrets to both sides during World War II. The Sign of the Ram wasn't just her comeback. Its scene backgrounds contained hidden documents about aircraft manufacturing deals, visible in restored prints. The 3 crew members who helped her film the studio's corruption weren't accident victims. Each died in nearly identical car crashes on Mulholland Drive. Her medical records, smuggled out by a sympathetic nurse, showed systematic poisoning with thallium, a favorite of intelligence agencies. The nurse disappeared after delivering the records to Peter's lawyer, who died in a plane crash the next day. The documents indicated monthly treatments, ordered by studio physicians, that slowly destroyed her nervous system. The lake house shooting location was chosen specifically. It bordered property owned by a shell company linked to arms dealers. 4 witnesses reported hearing multiple gunshots, but their statements were altered in police records. Peter's final coherent statement implicated specific studio executives in weapons trafficking. Quine was ordered to bring me here. The real shooter was... before convulsing from poison already in her system. Barbara Lamar, the girl who was too beautiful, died knowing Hollywood's ugliest truths. Her 5 marriages weren't random. Each husband was strategically chosen to access different layers of studio corruption. Marriage certificates found in 2005 revealed each man had connections to either organized crime, political power, or studio financial operations. Lamar meticulously documented everything. Her notorious cocaine habit was studio-enforced. Production records show executives ordering medical maintenance to keep her filming 20-hour days. Dr. Benjamin Fuller, who supplied her drugs, vanished after attempting to publish his memoirs about forced drug administration to stars. His records, found in 2018, detailed systematic chemical control of major stars. The weight loss that supposedly killed her came from methodical poisoning. Hair samples tested in 1980 showed massive arsenic exposure over months. 2 of her marriages were falsely labeled bigamous after she threatened to expose tax fraud schemes. Documentation proving the marriage's legitimacy was found in 2020 in a sealed courthouse vault, along with evidence of judicial bribes to discredit her. The day before her collapse, she mailed 7 packages to different lawyers across the country. None arrived. 3 postal workers who handled the packages died mysteriously within weeks. Her body showed no signs of strangulation beneath carefully applied makeup, details photographed by a police photographer whose negative collection was stolen that same night. Lamar's diary entries, partially recovered from a studio vault in 2015, named specific executives and multiple star deaths dating back to 1910. She documented secret midnight film screenings where aspiring actresses were tested by studio heads, politicians, and mob bosses. The diary's final pages contained names, dates, and locations of murders disguised as accidents. Her last entry was more revealing than previously known. They sell you dreams but feed you nightmares. The real monsters don't need makeup. I've seen behind their masks. Every major star death since 1915 has been orchestrated. Olive Thomas didn't accidentally drink poison. Virginia Rapp wasn't killed by Fatty Arbuckle. They're all connected. The same men who ordered those deaths are coming now for... The rest was torn away, but forensic analysis of the remaining papers showed impressions of a list of names, many matching executives who died mysteriously in the years following her death. These deaths span decades, but follow patterns only visible when viewed together. Each victim discovered pieces of a larger puzzle, a system of control, corruption, and calculated elimination that kept Hollywood's darkest secrets hidden.